Hello. I wanted to talk about two seemingly similar books that I think are quite opposite in their layout, in how they actually feel as you read them. But they both pick up an event that is sort of like an inverse version of the other one. One is a classic Russian writer, it's Gogol, and the other one is a mainly autofiction French writer, and it's Emmanuel Carrère. And I read The Moustache by Emmanuel Carrère a while ago. I don't remember exactly how long, but I remember it as I was reading the notes on this wonderful book that George Saunders wrote, which has a collection of short Russian stories. I will talk about this book once I'm finished, because it's cold and I'm going very slow with it. Yeah, I'm basically the Moustache. Is about a man who saves his mustache and gets no reaction for that. He had his mustache for years, and yet not even his wife reacts when he saves him. When he saves it, not only does she not react, but she does not acknowledge the fact that he had a mustache before. His friends also don't react. At the beginning, he thinks everything is just a bad joke, but the more he indagates, the more he investigates and tries to deepen into this and even question himself about whether or not his memory might be flawed, he realizes that this is not a joke, that this is happening, that like there is an aspect of his reality that he took for granted and is not a memory, that it's failing him. And if that memory is failing him, what other memories could be failing him? Quickly he comes to the conclusion that either him or her are crazy, and reality just starts to collapse around him, starting from something so small and even parodic as comic as a mustache. Similarly, yeah, basically the main character in The Nose by Gogol, one morning wakes up and he doesn't have a nose. And that's sort of like the connection I made between the two. The difference is that he gets the opposite. He has the opposite reaction to this because it was against his will. It was not something he did willingly. So he doesn't believe that he doesn't have a nose at first. Then he realizes that he does not have a nose, in fact, and doesn't understand how such an event could ever happen. And what he's afraid is of other people finding out. And he starts to search for his nose. And it's very witty. It's definitely a funny book. Unlike The Moustache, this one is funny. You take the event way less seriously, but at the same time you are like, why is this writer writing as if such event was actually normal? Because like all the characters here act on a normal way about an event that shouldn't be normal, but none of them has like any exaggerated feature. They don't like, it's not like, you don't feel like you're reading a fantasy text or anything like that. It's pretty much realism, or it's absurdism as well, but it's pretty much realism. And that means that like everything in the story makes sense and everything feels kind of like almost procedural. I lost this, I'm trying to find it, I look at the authorities, everything is reasonable. But then we are bothered by this very unreasonable choice of the author of removing the nose, and then the guy encounters the nose wearing an uniform, and the uniform of the nose is of a higher rank than he is, because this is Russian. This is obviously, there's like a critiques on bureaucracy and everything, and there's a lot more than what I'm talking about to both books. But the thing is that because the nose is wearing a uniform of a higher rank, when he sees his nose, he can't just approach it like that and take it, because it's higher rank. So he has to go all diplomatic and try to talk the nose into going back to him. But the nose doesn't acknowledge this, and well, a series of events happen. It's basically that continuously that is the main story. Although the book starts with the nose being found on a baked loaf on a barber's house, and this is the barber of the main character. Yet the barber doesn't appear again until later on the story. But what is interesting about this and the other story is not so much the story itself as that one thing that starts the domino effect that affects the rest of the story. I feel like the Moustache is a much more reasonable text, in the sense that, like, it is more conceivable. It is more the Moustache itself loses protagonism, unlike in the nose, in which it is very much always there in the main impulse of all action. While in the Moustache is more about reality, about being or not being crazy, not about recovering your nose and just going about your business. And that's also quite interesting, you know, like the character doesn't really change. He's a piece on this bureaucratic system, and he just wants to get back his nose so that he can get back to work and get a promotion and all that. The reason why I like more the nose than I liked back then the Moustache, which I think is also about a good book. I do think that the Moustache is a good book, and I totally recommend it. And it definitely might be more food for thought than, like, it might be more interesting in the sense of, like, reflecting about how anything that you take for granted could be enough if it were removed from your life to make you question your own sanity and everything around you. In that sense, it's a bit Lovecraftian, but the nose happens to have a twist at the end that I think is just genius. I think it changes the story. It makes it a work. It makes it a classic, and it wasn't before the last page, in my opinion. So I'm just gonna read a bit of a few lines from there, and then I'll talk about it. So, I can't understand, positively can't understand, but the strangest, the most incomprehensible of all things is how authors choose such subjects. I confess that this is quite inconceivable. It is indeed. No, I just can't understand it at all. In the first place, there is absolutely no benefit in it for the fatherland. In the second place, there is no benefit either. I simply don't know what to make of it. In spite of it all, though of course we might assume this and that and the other, perhaps even, and after all, where aren't there incongruities? But all the same, when you think about it, there really is something in all this. Whatever anyone says, such a things happen in this world. Rarely, but they do happen. And of course, some of the events on this story don't happen, but obviously you should not take those events literally, and then you might start applying in which sense does the author, that's sort of like out of itself for a moment, but to criticize the whole story. What might he be referring to when he says that they do happen? What people suddenly loses something that they took for granted, and that completely makes the reality to crumble. That's a relatable event, but more importantly, the author is questioning the premise of the book and what the book has done with it. But he doesn't lose the rhythm. He doesn't lose the sense that the author itself is part of the story. It doesn't negate that the story happened. So it's breaking the fourth wall only to build another one. Because the story did happen in the author's voice. And yet he's arguing that or didn't happen in the, it's like it's speaking as if, okay, the why do authors write about these topics is basically becoming stops being a story about reality or about a nose being suddenly lost from someone's face, and it's more a story about literature, about what authors do with their imagination, and why do they do what they do, and where does that take us. And basically that swipes out the whole story. Later, George Saunders says in his commentary, in his reflection about this story, he says at the end, and just like that, like one of those Tibetan monks who spends weeks fastidiously creating a sand mandala, Gogol happily destroys his magnificent creation and sweeps it into the river. And I think that's the genius of the story. I think that's what makes it so good, is that it's not only not taking itself seriously, but it's questioning itself and its genre. And not in an inquisitive, philosophical way, because the whole point is to not give it the seriousness that it sometimes proclaims. It's just a game, and it's a very playful story all the way to the end, and then it's playful with the fact that it has been, and with the author itself, and and there is also layers to the narrator. You have a narrator that normally narrates in a different way, narrating this time as if he were a narrator inside the narration. It feels different in many ways, and I really enjoyed it, and normally don't enjoy these kind of stories. So highly recommend Gogol's Nose. I think that's my choice if I had to choose one versus the other, versus the Moustache from Carrère. But I also recommend the Moustache. That's it.